I was sitting hunched over a spreadsheet, trying to concentrate on the smallest details of the numbers, when a quiet but insistent vibration made me jump. Looking up at my phone screen, I saw my mother's name, and immediately felt that familiar, unpleasant jolt in my stomach that always appeared when one of my relatives called unexpectedly. They never called out of the blue, only sent dry messages, usually when they needed money. I tried to pull myself together and answered evenly, "Hello," though deep down I hoped there wouldn't be a hint of suspicion in my tone. But a second later, I heard my mother's voice, quiet and weak, barely above a whisper. "Caprice, darling, I'm really unwell, my head is spinning and my chest hurts so much. Your father is always at work, and I'm here alone." She paused briefly, and I could hear her uneven, ragged breathing, sending a chill down my spine. "I need you, Caprice," she added. "I really need your help." My brain instantly, like a well-oiled machine, switched into problem-solving mode, and I asked, "What about Laura? Maybe she can check up on you?" Laura was my older sister, the one who had always been considered the golden child in our family, Mom and Dad's favorite, the epitome of a proper daughter. There was a heavy sigh, a crackling connection, and then Mom said, "Laura has 3 children, she's too busy, she can't take care of me." I bit my lip, because deep down I knew Laura was always too busy, but only for things that didn't benefit her personally. "Please, Caprice," her voice wavered, as if she were about to cry, "could you come and stay with me? Just for a couple of weeks, until I get a little stronger." I would never ask if I weren't desperate. I glanced at the computer screen, where reminders of 3 major projects and client meetings my boss had said would determine my future at the company blazed. My vacation wasn't supposed to start for another month, and I knew perfectly well how far behind schedule I'd be if I took off now. But how could I say no to my own mother if she was sick? "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said quietly, already mentally going over what needed to be completed, who would delegate what, and how to organize everything. "Thank you, dear," my mother said, a sudden firmness creeping into her voice, then added, "You've always been reliable, Caprice, the family doormat." That's exactly how I felt at that moment. After hanging up, I immediately stood up and headed to my boss's office. Knocking on the door, I asked cautiously, "Got a minute, Marco?" When he looked up, I steeled myself. "It's about my mother, she's sick, my father is working, and there's no one else to take care of her. I need to fly home tomorrow, just for a couple of weeks." Marco frowned. "What about your projects? The Peterson story?" I nodded. "I know, I'm sorry, I wouldn't have asked if it weren't an emergency." He looked at me carefully, then leaned back in his chair and said, "Family is everything, we'll get through this, see you in 2 weeks." Returning to my desk, I immediately booked a ticket for a morning flight to my hometown, a city I hadn't visited in 4 years, for long years, without Christmas invitations, without birthday calls, without shared family celebrations, only short messages asking for money. That evening, I silently packed my suitcase, checked my documents, set my alarm for dawn, and, looking around at my small apartment on the West Coast, where I lived alone and which was as far from my parents as it could be within the country, I thought, this distance hadn't been chosen by chance. The flight was uneventful, as was the taxi ride from the airport to my parents' house. The neighborhood looked unchanged: manicured lawns, American flags on the porches, basketball hoops by the garages, identical driveways. My parents' house, a small ranch-style house with peeling blue paint, long overdue for a fresh coat. My heart pounded as I raised my hand and knocked on the door. It opened abruptly, and Mom appeared in the doorway, looking perfectly healthy, freshly dyed hair, neat makeup, earrings that matched her blouse. I froze. "Mom? Are you okay?" She grabbed my hand and pulled me inside. "Caprice, you're here?" I asked, stunned. "What about your health? You said you were sick." Mom laughed and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it was just a little lie to get you to come home. Surprise." I stood in the hallway, clutching the handle of my suitcase tightly, my mind refusing to accept what was happening. Voices and laughter drifted from the living room, and Mom called loudly, "Look who's here." I followed her in and saw Dad, comfortably settled in an armchair with a newspaper. Laura was sitting on the sofa with her husband, Rodolfo, and next to them were their 3 children, Elma, Stefano, and little Zoe, whom I barely recognized because I'd only seen them a couple of times in my life. "Caprice," Laura said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you're really here." Dad looked up from the newspaper. "Hey, "Baby, what's going on?" I looked around helplessly and said, "Mom said she was sick," but Mom exclaimed, almost triumphantly, "We're going on vacation. For 10 days, to Florida. We've been planning this for a long time. We need someone to watch the kids while we're gone." The realization that I'd been brought here by a lie hit me suddenly and coldly, like someone had poured a bucket of ice water over my head, and I stood stunned in the middle of the living room, clutching my suitcase and not knowing where to look. "You lied about being sick," I finally blurted out, "and all this just so I could fly across the country and babysit your kids, Laura?" I couldn't believe my own words, but the reality was setting in. "Don't be so dramatic," my sister replied dismissively, leaning back on the sofa, her voice dripping with her usual condescension. "Your job isn't that important. No one will even notice you're gone." I felt my face flush with anger, as if the blood had rushed to my cheeks and was about to burst forth in a torrent of words. "I had to take an emergency leave," I said, barely keeping my voice from shaking. "I have projects to complete, commitments that my career depends on." But my mother, as if not wanting to hear my objections, interrupted decisively. "That's what family does, we help each other." She said it so firmly, as if her words were meant to dot the I's and cross the T's. "Laura and Rodolfo haven't taken a vacation in years. Your father and I haven't been to Florida since our honeymoon. It's important to us." I looked at the faces looking at me impatiently, with a strange sense of self-righteousness, and I saw no trace of doubt, not a shred of guilt for forcing me to quit my job and fly here. These people I called my family had lied to me, manipulated me, and now they expected me to obediently submit to their plan. As always, I was seething inside. I could have screamed right then and there, told them everything that had been building up for years, everything I thought about their little scam, about how they were used to using me, but something stopped me at the last moment. Maybe it was the fact that I'd spent my whole life playing second fiddle, being reliable and convenient, the person who helped and never complained, or maybe it was the sudden, crystal clear thought that I could handle this situation completely differently. I took a deep breath and, tensing my facial muscles, forced a smile. "You know what? You're right, family helps family, so when are you leaving?" In that instant, the tension in the room vanished, as if it had never been there. Mom clapped her hands joyfully and exclaimed, "See, I told you she'd understand. We're leaving in 2 days, darling, it's going to be wonderful." Their faces lit up, and everyone immediately perked up, talking about the upcoming trip, discussing details, anticipating the long-awaited vacation, and I, keeping a forced smile on my face, mentally retraced my steps, recalling all the times when my place in this family had been marginalized. I pictured myself helping Mom with the cleaning while Laura was shopping with her friends. I recalled going to work at 16, while my parents had paid for my sister's college without a second thought, how I won a scholarship and went to study in another state, a fact that hardly anyone in our family noticed. As if it were a given, I recalled their rare calls, always asking for money, and always without the slightest hint of gratitude, and now they were talking again about family helping family, and I clearly understood. Yes, I will help them, but not at all in the way they expected. That evening, we all gathered around the large table for dinner. Mom placed her signature dish, lasagna, the only thing she ever made well, in the center, and everyone was praising her culinary talent while animatedly discussing their upcoming vacation. "We got a fantastic deal on the hotel," Dad said with a satisfied smile, helping himself to another piece, "right on the beach in Tampa." I nodded and, forcing a smile, said, "That's great," though at that moment, completely different thoughts were brewing in my head, frantic plans for revenge and vengeance. Rodolfo, Laura's husband, brightened as he began talking about the golf courses where he planned to spend half his vacation. I only half listened, knowing him only slightly. He'd entered my life 6 years ago when he married my sister, and I'd seen him maybe 3 times since then. He seemed nice, but one thing was clear now: he was completely okay with me being used as an unpaid nanny for his kids. "Caprice, we've made a schedule for the kids," Mom said, handing me a printed sheet of colored paper. "Here it is. Zoe wakes up sometimes during the night, but Stefano and Elma usually sleep soundly. Stefano has a peculiarity: he doesn't like anyone touching his food, and Elma can't sleep without her blanket." I took the paper, pretending to study it carefully. "I see. Anything else I should know?" "Yes," Laura interjected, "Stefano is allergic to strawberries, and Elma has soccer practice on Tuesday and Thursday. You'll have to drive her." no problem, I replied, though the thought immediately flashed through my mind, I don't have a car, but of course, they hadn't even considered that. They were sure I could figure it out on my own, as always. After dinner, Laura, Rodolfo, and the kids went up to the guest room they were occupying. Dad put on a baseball game, and Mom busied herself with the dishes. I took advantage of the moment, slipped quietly into my old bedroom, and closed the door. The room, which had once held my posters and a shelf of books, now resembled a storage room, boxes along the walls, old furniture, and a double bed in the corner. I sat down on it, pulled out my phone, and dialed Marco's number. My hand shook as I held the receiver to my ear. "Caprice, is your mom okay?" he asked, sounding worried. "Not exactly," I said, and I told him everything, how Mom pretended to be sick to get me to come over, when really she needed someone to babysit Laura's kids. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Wow," Marco finally said, "that's pretty manipulative." I pressed my palm to my face, feeling tears sting my eyes. "I'm sorry I quit my job for this. I should have known something was wrong." "Hey, don't apologize," he said softly, "you did the right thing, you tried to help, but..." He trailed off again, and I caught him choosing his words. "So, what are you going to do next?" I didn't know how to respond to Marco, because part of me really wanted to go to the airline's website right then and there, buy a return ticket, and fly home to my quiet apartment and my spreadsheets, where everything was simple and predictable. "You could do that," he said calmly, "or you could turn this situation into a real vacation. You already have free time, Caprice, why not use it for yourself?" I blinked, stunned by his proposal. "Do you really think this is a good idea?" I asked, and instantly felt the thought take root within me. "Absolutely," Marco replied confidently. "Look, we've already distributed your projects among the other employees. Don't rush back, you deserve a rest after what they just put you through." Hanging up, I felt an unusual sense of relief and immediately opened my laptop, deciding to check out travel options. If my family was planning a getaway to Florida, I definitely didn't want to be back in the same place. On the contrary, I wanted something different, better, brighter, with a touch of true escape. And suddenly, Mexico caught my eye, or more specifically, Cancun, with its white beaches and clear waters, promising peace and freedom. I scrolled through the photos of the resorts and almost laughed with joy. One of them was offering rooms starting the day after tomorrow, just when my family would be leaving. Without a second thought, I booked a room and then found an early morning flight that would allow me to leave before Mom, Dad, Laura, and her noisy group headed to the airport. I imagined myself sipping a margarita on the beach while they were just boarding the plane, and my heart filled with sweet anticipation. I spent the next morning amidst the bustle of family life. Mom and Laura were running around with notepads and pens, making endless lists. Dad was checking documents and tickets, and the children were squealing with excitement, anticipating the upcoming trip. I took advantage of the opportunity and ran to the nearest shopping mall, where I bought everything I could possibly need for a tropical paradise: a new swimsuit, a light beach cover-up, sandals, and sunscreen. Returning home, I hid my purchases at the very bottom of my suitcase, covering them with regular clothes so no one would notice. That evening, I checked all the reservations and tickets again, making sure everything was ready, and felt a slight twinge of guilt before the children, who, in essence, were innocent. But then I remembered how Laura had dismissed my career as just a job, unworthy of attention, and how my parents had lied to lure me here, and the twinge instantly vanished. Memories of my childhood surfaced, hard and unfair compared to Laura's carefree one. At 12, I cooked dinner and mopped floors while my sister ran around with her friends. At 16, I got a job at a store to buy my own clothes and stationery, while 19-year-old Laura was in college and living entirely on my parents' money. I never received a cent from them, fought for every scholarship, every opportunity, and when I left for another state to study, they hardly noticed. They only called when they urgently needed money, and I never received any repayment for what I gave. And now they'd reached the pinnacle of manipulation, feigning illness to lock me in here and force me to care for the children. No, the guilt had vanished completely. They'd made their choice, now it was my turn. The day they left, I rose before dawn. My flight was scheduled for 8 in the morning, theirs was for 2 in the afternoon, which meant I had to leave the house by 6. I quietly packed my things, trying not to make a sound, opened the window in my room, and carefully dropped my suitcase down into the thick bushes that would cover it until I could leave. The suitcase landed with a dull, soft thud, and I winced, listening to the silence of the house. All was quiet. A few minutes later, my mother knocked on my door. "Caprice, are you up yet? So early?" I hurriedly opened the door, already fully dressed and ready to go. "Yes," I replied with the calmest smile I could muster. "I thought I'd run to the store and pick up some groceries and some essentials for the kids, so you'll be more comfortable when you leave." "That's so thoughtful," Mom said, looking genuinely pleased, and added, "We're going to the airport in 4 hours, will you be back by then?" "Oh, of course," I lied without hesitation, "I'll be there in about 15 minutes. I went downstairs, where Dad was already making coffee in the kitchen, said a quick goodbye, hugging him as I went, and headed for the door. Rounding the house, I pulled my suitcase out of the bushes and quickly walked down the street, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid the neighbors would hear it. Reaching the corner, where their windows could no longer see me, I called a taxi. A few minutes later, the car pulled up, and without looking back, I slid into the back seat. "To the airport, please," I told the driver, and with a click, I hung up the phone, as if cutting the last thread connecting me to this house. The airport was bustling with the usual bustle, loud flight announcements, the creaking of suitcase wheels on the tiles, the smell of coffee and perfume mixed with the scent of expensive perfume and fatigue. But I didn't care at all, because for the first time in my life, I felt not anxiety, not irritation, not the usual sense of duty, but a complete, dazzling sense of freedom. I checked in for my flight, leisurely made my way through security, and found my gate, deliberately not even glancing at my phone, knowing it would soon be ringing off the hook with calls, messages, pleas, and threats. I bought myself a large glass of hot coffee, picked up a magazine with a bright cover, and sank into a seat near the boarding area, feeling like I was relaxing for the first time since that call from my mother. No one was demanding money from me, no one was dictating what I had to do, no one was trying to turn my life into an endless list of other people's worries and responsibilities. When my boarding group was announced, I stood up and walked toward the steps with a smile that blossomed on my face. I settled into a window seat, fastened my seatbelt, and only then glanced at my watch. Right now, at that very moment, my family was probably finishing their coffee and toast, getting ready to leave, absolutely certain their plan had worked. While their eldest daughter remained faithfully trapped in domestic confinement with the children, little did they know, their carefully orchestrated scam was already rolling down the runway, and it was heading in a direction completely different from what they had planned. The flight to Cancun was calm and easy. I watched a movie, dozed off for a moment, finally letting my body rest, and deliberately tried not to think about the scandal raging in my parents' house. By the time the plane touched down in Mexico, it was already midday, the sun was dazzlingly reflected off the glass, and my chest was fluttering. While I was waiting for my luggage, I turned on my phone, and it howled like a disturbed beehive. 27 missed calls, 42 messages, each one increasingly desperate and angry. "Where are you? Call me immediately," my mother wrote. "If you're not back in 10 minutes, we'll miss the flight." My father added, "Caprice, this isn't funny," Laura scribbled, followed by, "You're selfish," and I could almost hear her voice ringing with rage. I scrolled through the messages and easily tucked my phone back into my bag without saying a word. My luggage was quickly in my hands, and I stepped outside, where the sun hit my face with a raw heat, and a warm breeze immediately softened it. Cancun was beautiful, bright, bustling, filled with the promise of happiness. The friendly taxi driver pointed out sights along the way, told me about beaches and restaurants, and I smiled, looking out the window, feeling like each turn of the wheels was taking me further and further from the clutches of my family. The resort exceeded my expectations. A snow-white building with open terraces, well-maintained paths leading to the ocean, several pools surrounded by palm trees, and that boundless, deep blue horizon that seemed like the beginning of a new life. I checked in, went up to my room, and treated myself to a long shower, washing away the sticky fatigue and any remnants of guilt, putting on a new swimsuit and a light cover-up. I stepped out onto the balcony, inhaled the salty air, and then decided to call my mother. She answered almost immediately, her voice thick with anger. "Caprice, where the hell are you?" I said calmly, "I'm in Mexico, at a resort in Cancun." There was silence, as if she was trying to process what she'd heard. "What are you talking about? Come back immediately. You made us miss our flight. I'm so sorry, I said evenly, but I'm not going back to babysit. You did it on purpose, my mother muttered. You planned it all. Yes, exactly, I replied, just like you concocted your illness in advance to lure me home. That's different. We needed your help, she protested, and you decided that lying was the best way to get it? You didn't even ask if I could or wanted to? You were just manipulating me, like always. Laura could have hired a nanny or asked me honestly, but you chose deception. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Mom's voice broke. You ruined everything. Our vacation is cancelled. We won't get a refund, everything is lost. I'm sorry, I said, and this time I really meant it, but maybe this will teach you to treat me with respect. Respect? After all this? Mom almost shouted. Laura was right, you're selfish. I laughed, because it sounded too ironic. It's so sweet to hear such words from people who call me exclusively for money and never return a cent. How dare you? Mom screamed. No, how dare you? I said firmly, all of you. I'm tired of being your doormat, now I'll live for myself, and without waiting for her answer, I hung up. The phone rang again almost immediately, this time with Laura's name. I declined the call, then simply turned off the phone and put it in my bag. Afterward, I went down to the pool bar, ordered a margarita, and took a long sip while gazing at the sparkling ocean. At that moment, for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few days in Mexico were a true miracle, the likes of which I had never even dared to dream. I swam in the warm, clear sea, where every wave gently embraced my body. I read books right on the beach, inhaling the scent of salt and sun. I tried my hand at scuba diving and marveled at how vibrant and diverse the underwater world could be. And in the evenings, I indulged in the most delicious food, so rich and spicy that every dish felt like a feast for the soul. I turned on my phone only once a day, a quick check of my work email, which, to my relief, was silent, and posted a few photos on social media. Sunny beaches, selfies with glasses of vibrant cocktails, stunning, heart-stopping sunsets, and each time, Laura's caustic comments invariably appeared under the photos. I hope you're happy with yourself, Mom won't stop crying, the kids keep asking where Aunt Caprice is. But I didn't respond, I simply scrolled through her comments and continued posting new photos, because for the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself. On the fourth day, while sitting at the pool bar, I met a man named Gaston. He was in Cancun for work, his trip had ended early, and he decided to stay for a few more days. We got to talking, and it turned out we had a lot in common. He was an attentive listener, and he wasn't the least bit embarrassed when I laughed and shyly told him about my complicated family drama. He didn't judge me, didn't advise me on what to do, didn't look down on me, he simply listened and accepted me for who I was. It turned out to be surprisingly easy and pleasant, and we spent the rest of the vacation together, talking, walking along the beach, and laughing over little things. By the end of the week, I felt like a different woman, rested, confident, strong, something I hadn't felt in years. As we said goodbye to Gaston, we exchanged numbers, though I had no idea how it would turn out, and I boarded the plane back with a light heart. I still had 3 days of vacation left, and I decided to spend them at home, cleaning, doing laundry, and mentally preparing for my return to work. Marco wrote me a short letter. How are you? Check in. I replied that I'd be back exactly on time and felt grateful to him for giving me a chance to breathe. The phone stopped ringing with calls from my family, but the silence that followed was even more oppressive and unsettling than their earlier anger. Then, the day before I went back to work, it rang again. The name of Aunt Marge, Mom's sister, appeared on the screen. We'd never been particularly close, but she'd always treated me with warmth. Caprice, this is your Aunt Marge, I heard her voice. Hi, Aunt Marge, I said cautiously. She continued, I heard what happened with your parents and Laura, they're telling everyone you ruined their vacation. I sighed heavily. Did they mention they lied about Mom being sick to get me to stay with the kids? No, Marge replied after a pause. They left that part out for some reason. Then I told her everything, without holding back a single detail, how my mother had faked illness, how the 3 of them had planned their vacation and I'd been assigned as an unpaid nanny, how I'd learned the truth and decided not to play by their rules. When I finished, there was silence on the phone, and then my aunt said, "Well, damn it, your mother always had a flair for the dramatic, but this is too much, so you believe me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Of course I do, I love my sister, but she always singled out Laura, and you were relegated to the background. I saw it when you were kids, it wasn't fair then, and it's not fair now." Her words touched me deeply. For so many years I'd thought I was exaggerating, that I was oversensitive, that it was all just in my head. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. "Caprice, what you did was brave," she said softly, "and I can't blame you. Sometimes people need a wake-up call." We talked for a while longer, and when I hung up, I felt a strange relief. At least one person in my family was on my side. The next day, I returned to work, and Marco greeted me with a smile. "Welcome back, how was Mexico?" "Amazing," I said, and I meant it. "Thanks for pushing me to this idea." He nodded. "And the family drama?" "Still dramatic," I replied, "but I won't let it rule my life anymore." The next weeks passed quietly, no calls from Mom, no messages from Laura, and I immersed myself in work, in my projects. When Gaston called unexpectedly and confessed he couldn't stop thinking about me, I agreed to try our long-distance relationship. But one evening, almost a month after Mexico, the phone rang again. It was Mom's number. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Caprice." Her voice was tense. "How are you?" "I'm fine, and you?" "We have become better," she replied dryly. "Your father and I have talked a lot about what happened. What you did was very hurtful. We lost a lot of money on tickets and a hotel. No sorry for the lie, no admission that they had used me like an object." "That's sad," I said quietly. "Maybe next time you should hire a nanny instead of faking an illness and luring me home." Mom sighed heavily, and the sound betrayed weariness, resentment, and an attempt to justify something she felt didn't require justification. "We didn't lie," she said, her voice trembling, as if she didn't quite believe her own words. "We just embellished the truth a little. Family is supposed to help each other, Caprice, that's what we do." I closed my eyes, my insides clenching at this familiar explanation, and quietly replied, "Is that what we do? Are you sure? Because from my side, it looks like I'm endlessly helping you, sacrificing my time, energy, and money, and you're just taking advantage. Is that fair, Mom? Does that even feel reciprocated?" I paused, and before she could interject, I continued. "Tell me honestly, when was the last time you called just for fun, not to ask for money, not to force another favor on me, but just to find out how I was doing, how I was living, how I was breathing?" Silence answered, so thick and heavy that I could hear my heart pounding. "I thought so." I said quietly. "Listen, Mom, I'm not saying what I did was right. Yes, it may have been petty, perhaps too harsh, but I won't allow myself to be the family ATM and unpaid babysitter anymore." "So, what do you mean by that?" she asked in a different voice, quiet, even cautious. "What I mean," I replied, trying to speak calmly, "is that if you want a relationship with me, it has to be two-way. I need to feel valued, not just useful. I'm a person too, Mom, with my own life and my own needs." There was another pause, and finally she said, "I'll think about what you said." "Do so," I replied firmly. "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up, my chest feeling like I'd stepped off a cliff. I didn't know if this was the beginning of a long healing or the final nail in the coffin of our relationship, but I knew one thing for sure, I didn't regret standing up for myself. That weekend, a text from Laura arrived. "The kids miss you." No apology, no acknowledgement, just another attempt to use her own children as emotional leverage. I chuckled. Classic Laura. And, oddly enough, this time I wasn't hurt. I simply didn't respond. Life went on. I was offered a promotion at work, and I accepted it, feeling proud of myself. Gaston and I talked on the phone more and more often and even started dating long distance. One day, he flew to my city, and I happily showed him my favorite places. As if opening up my little world to him, I joined a hiking club and made new friends with whom we planned hikes and walks. Life became more enjoyable. 3 months after the Mexican incident, Aunt Marge called again. "I thought you'd like to know," she said. "Your mother admitted to me that they were wrong to lie to you." I chuckled, imagining the effort it must have taken her to say something like that. "She didn't use those exact words, of course," Marge continued, "but she said they should have been more honest about helping with the children. It's practically an admission of guilt." I laughed. "Yes, I suppose you could say that, Aunt." Marge added gently, give them time, Caprice, they're stubborn, but they love you, do they love me? I asked doubtfully, yes, she replied, in their own way, it's not perfect, but it's there. After the call, I sat for a long time and thought about how families come in different forms, the kind we're born with, and the kind we choose. I'd spent too many years trying to earn the love and approval of my parents and Laura, though it never worked. Maybe it would always be like that, and maybe there was nothing wrong with that. I'd built a good life for myself, I had a fulfilling job, friends who appreciated me, and a relationship with someone who liked me simply for who I was. I no longer needed to be a doormat to feel worthy. A week later, I received a card in the mail. Inside was a check, the very money my family had borrowed from me, and a short note in my mother's handwriting. Sorry it took so long, love, Mom. It wasn't a full-blown apology, it wasn't a promise to make things right, but it was at least a small step, an acknowledgement that I deserved attention too. I deposited the check and sent a short message of gratitude. Sometimes it's the little steps that change lives. I wondered if I wanted a reconciliation, and I couldn't find an honest answer. Part of me missed them, but another part of me was afraid of falling back into the same traps. For now, I was grateful for the distance and the chance to breathe freely. Maybe one day we'd find a way to a healthier relationship, maybe not. Either way, I realized I could handle it. The revenge I'd initially craved wasn't what I was looking for. What I really wanted was validation, to be seen as a person, not a resource. My phone vibrated, a text from Gaston, dinner tonight. I smiled and quickly typed, can't wait, and it was the honest truth. Life was still complicated, family was still a tricky topic, but for the first time in a long time, I was living by my own rules, without regrets. That evening, Gaston and I sat across from each other at our favorite restaurant. He looked at me and asked, have you spoken to them lately? I shook my head and replied, not really, it's better this way. My whole life I've tried to be who they wanted me to be, and now I understand what I want. He raised his glass and said, to figuring all this out. I touched my glass to his, and in that moment I knew I had no regrets. Every word was true.